Very good. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining tonight. This is the fifth career roadmap series called Interview Strategies. As you know, if you've been on others before, we are recording tonight's session as well as the presentation that you see. We'll make sure that that's also loaded onto the URI Alumni Career Services website. You all are on mute right now. As we get into questions, I will unmute everyone. However, if we start getting some audio feedback, then we'll go back to muting everyone and we can use the chat box for questions. And certainly throughout the presentation, you can use the chat box. I will monitor it, and then we'll get to Q&A towards the end. But I'm so pleased to welcome Michele Gagnon. She's from the state of Rhode Island and from Talent Acquisition. She is the head TA person over at the state of Rhode Island. And folks always say, hey, how do you find your speakers? And quite honestly, looking at Michele's LinkedIn and talking to her, she's got quite a background that started a while back in the airline industry, then went into the financial services world. So she's just got such a great career, and it really makes you think, well, she had to have a lot of interviews along the way. And of course, here she is in talent acquisition, and she will be terrific to share the insights. So with that said, I'm going to pass the baton over to Michele. And Michele, welcome. And introductory remarks are fine. And while you're doing that, I'll bring up the presentation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for your time. I'm honored and thank you, Karen, for inviting me this evening. This topic is something I have a ton of passion about. So I'm really, really excited to share those best practices tonight, especially in our changing world. Our world has changed to what we call the new virtual world. And I got to be honest with you, and this is my personal opinion, but being in TA for a long time, I really believe we're not going backwards from this. So the faster we master these new skills, the better off we are, especially when it comes to interviewing and applying for roles. So thank you. So tonight we'll go over the tips of today's job search and in interviewing best practices. So if we can move to the next slide, that would be great.
Yes, so I am trying, and it is not moving for me. There we go.
There we go. And that's just picture me in the state logo. So thank you for that. Thank you for the introduction. Today's agenda, we're going to be talking about resume tips for applying. I'm going to really hone in on informational interviews because I think in this world, this is something that people really don't think about. If you're going through your day, if you're thinking about, well, maybe if a good opportunity comes, but I'm comfortable in my role, you never really think about this, but I'm really going to hone in on the importance of this. So I'm so passionate about that. I'll go over best practices and important questions to ask when preparing for an interview. We'll talk about virtual interviews, the new way of our interview world. And then last, marketing yourself, and how important that is in this day and age.
So I will say, Michele, that as you move closer to the screen, we're getting a little feedback.
Oh, okay. Let me push back a little. Oh, I don't know why we're getting that. All right.
All good now.
I'll go back a little bit further here. So the number one thing to do now is network. Even if you are not looking for a role, I'm going to tell you how important this is.
So I'm not sure if anyone has their, if they've been able to unmute. Just take a look down at the bottom menu and make sure that your audio is on mute. Make sure your audio is on mute. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we'll get back to networking. It keeps a little bit every time I talk. Let's try this. So networking and connecting, I think, is one of the most important things to do in this environment of job searching. A lot of people don't even know that there's an opportunity in LinkedIn. Opportunities. So on the next page, I'll show you an opportunity of a slide that will show you where to find. But even if you are not looking for a job, I want you to network. Everyone says this, you don't really. I think someone's.
Yeah, so Rick, I'm not sure if you're on mute, but it does seem that you are trying to speak. We keep getting a message, and if I could just ask that you put your audio on mute, that would be terrific. As Michele rounds the end of this presentation, we will have opportunity for questions.
Thank you.
All right, give it a go.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, even if you're not looking for a role, I think this is so important in our day and age. Unfortunately, companies now are doing cuts. A lot of people that felt a little bit secure in their role or a lot secure are feeling that sense of uncertainty. So you always want to be prepared just in case. Hopefully that never happens to you, but if it has, you know how that feels. And then you're starting from kind of ground up, applying for jobs like everybody else in this highly competitive world. So I think really networking is really important. Being open to new opportunities. If you are open to new opportunities, you want that to shine on your LinkedIn page. You also want to make sure a summary under your LinkedIn intro page, it's right listed right underneath your picture on LinkedIn. You really want to make it, I would say, average 3 sentences the most. You don't want a novel, but you really want those skill sets to shine. Um, so I hope all of you are active on LinkedIn, and we can talk about that more in the Q&A section. And there's just a photo of where you can find that opportunity to put that toggle on, looking for opportunities. You press on where it says more, that little pencil to the right, which is the edit button. And then you can look there and it says looking for opportunities, and you would just press that plus sign. So when recruiters are using LinkedIn Recruiter, they'll be able to know that you're open to having a conversation. And even if you're not, I know a lot of people are afraid for their employers to see that. And I do get that. Apparently, LinkedIn will tell you that your employer is not supposed to see that, but they can't guarantee that. But I always say opportunities could be to help a recruiter, for your network, those types of things. So I think it's a really important thing to always have those conversations. So we'll move on to the next slide. So I talked about that asking for informational interviews. And like I mentioned before, I'm really passionate about this because I've seen it work. I've seen it be so successful. And I think in this day and age where people's, livelihood and their positions are being eliminated or changed, you really want to know the company that you could possibly go with, a target company. So using LinkedIn, I always send a professional connection. I highly, highly recommend when you are connecting with someone that you really want them to accept it, make it personalized. There's a little box that pops up and it gives you the opportunity to write, introduce yourself and ask them why, if they would connect and say a little thing about yourself. And I think the statistics last time I checked were 92% that people's connections requests will be accepted with that small box of an explanation. So that's really successful. Always network with the HR professionals at your target companies. Also connect with the hiring managers. And if you do get connected, ask them for an informational meeting or even ask them for 10 minutes of their time just to talk about the culture of the company. Because if you are applying or did apply, you really want to know kind of the inside culture of that organization. You don't always get that from a website. So those are things that I think are really success things that most people don't do. And in this day and age, you're marketing yourself and you really want to stand out. And those are the things that I think will make you stand out. I don't think I know because I've seen success with that. So we can talk about that again. Also, too, tips on making your resume stand out. In this competitive environment, more people are qualified for that same role. 9 months ago, I would say the job seeker was in the driver's seat. Unfortunately, due to COVID, it's changed dramatically. So, I mean, one job can have 500 resumes, and how are you going to stand out? What if I have 200 people that are qualified on paper? What's going to make someone stand out? I can tell you if someone reached out to me on LinkedIn, had a conversation, or sent me a really professional note, I'm going to look for their resume. And that's something most hiring managers will do. So that's something to remember. So tips for standing out, especially during COVID. Companies want to know that you are adaptable, period. COVID hit us like a ton of bricks, pretty much overnight. So you really want that adaptability. Companies are looking for that. So highlight your resume with those things. Willing to be coached. Every company and every hire manager that I know wants to be able to hire someone that can be coached. And most people will accept that because they'll be better in their role. So those are things you want to really highlight, and your flexibility. I mean, your job can change on a dime now, especially during the COVID situation. So you want to showcase how flexible you have been in your career and that your skill sets are transferable to another part of the workplace in your current role. So those are things to think about when you're putting together your resume. So this is just a continuation of making your resume stand out. Focus on your relevant skills. Be concise. No novels, no long sentences. When I think of a resume, I think of something that I read that I have to meet that person, or in this case, have to talk to that person. Think about it is the biggest marketing piece of your professional career. So some of these things really stand out. Highlight secondary education. If you are working on a certification, put that and put the estimated time that you'll be finished with that. Elaborate on volunteer work. Most companies that I know are really big into giving back to the communities that where they're located. So if you have volunteer work, you really want that to shine because that really stands out to hiring managers and to recruiters. Leverage LinkedIn, a big thing nowadays, and they don't say it, but I know what happens is clean up your social media. I always say if there's something on there you are questioning, don't have it on there, especially during your job search. And when you do join a company, you'll be signing a very strict social media policy, and those things are all included. So I say, if you are questioning anything on your social media that you wouldn't want at a professional level to see, take it down or put it on private. Those are really important because I can tell you that companies do look at social media pages all the time. And that's something we didn't think about years ago, but now it's very important. So we'll move on here. So we'll go on to being virtually prepared in our new world of interviewing. There's people, I'm sure, on the phone here that never thought they'd have to interview again. There's people that are great interviewers in person, and you think, how am I going to showcase those skills on a screen? Because that's where our interview process has gone. And honestly, I don't think it's going back. I think companies getting used to it. They've invested in these fantastic virtual tools, and they can do it from the comfort of their home if they're working from home. So we have to master this, and you have to be good at it. We were talking, Karen and I were talking about connectivity, and you always want to be one of these tips, I think, when you are interviewing is if you have let's say a Zoom call or a WebEx or a Teams call, those are the popular ones now. You always want to have a backup plan. So when you are talking to a recruiter, you want to ask them what the backup plan is just in case their technology isn't working that day, yours isn't. Make sure you have a call-in number so you're not panicking, excuse me, at the last minute. So those things will make you feel a little bit more relaxed when you go for that interview. I can't say this enough. Take tutorials on the virtual platforms. If you go on YouTube, there are tutorials about every single virtual platform on there. I'd say take as many as you can. Most of the companies themselves, like Zoom or different platforms, have their own, but people are on YouTube all the time, and you can really master that. Once you feel comfortable with the platform, practice. Have a spouse or a friend or a college, roommate say, listen, I'm going to send you a link on your computer and I need to practice this. I want to see what I look like on film, how I present, tell me constructive criticism, what I can do better, because those things you really want to master because it's a different world talking to a computer now versus, a human being in front of you. So definitely take advantage of the platform tutorials. I still do that today. I mean, Zoom, WebEx, I have Microsoft Teams, and some days if I haven't used it in a while, I'm kind of toggling around. But those you can't feel um, intimidated by. You kind of just have to jump in, practice, and like anything else, when you practice, you get better at it, and you feel so much more comfortable. So those are some best tips on getting virtually prepared. We'll move on here. So you want to be informed. You want to prepare your questions. And I always use the 10 question rule. And I've used this for years. And I've mentored people and they're like, well, what is that? So I always say, you know what, if you went in with 10 questions, I can guarantee you 5 to 7 of those will be answered in the interview. You never want to get to an end of an interview and say, well, you answered all my questions. I don't have any more because that doesn't look like you're prepared, even though you were. So I would say have 10 questions in front of you, and it is completely fine to have questions written in front of you on a notepad if you are in person. If you're not, it's a little bit easier now. You can have it right in front of you. So I would say the 10 question rule of interviewing always has worked. And I just gave this, I'll give an example. My brother in California went for a new role and he said, oh my God, thank God I listened to you because every single question was answered except the last two. So he felt like, wow, this really worked. So just think of that when you're preparing questions. When you look at the company, we'll go over a couple of questions that I think are best practices, but you really want to go on the website. You want to look at the website culture. All these websites now have so many drop downs about tutorials, cultural tutorials on the company. People love to be on video and talk about the experience they have working on there. The more you know about the culture itself, the better off you are. Also, too, utilize university alumni on LinkedIn and Handshake. Um, for those who have roles that they're interested in, send them a message. Say, introduce yourself, say, I have an interview in 2 weeks and I'm preparing. I'm very excited to interview with ABC Company. Do you think you could spare 5 minutes of your time? I just have a couple questions about the culture before my interview. Would you be open to that? And I always say it's all in the way you ask and you will get it. People love to talk about their organization, especially, when they're happy there and they're excited for you to interview. And I think everyone wants to help. I believe that everybody wants to help everybody get to a better place in their career. So try that. It's worked for me in the past. It's worked for many people, and utilize that and utilize alumni. I always see URI alumni at the top of things that are connected, and it's always awesome to see that. So of course, the one alumni wants to talk to another alumni and make sure they do well on their interview. Follow the company of interest. You can follow them on LinkedIn. You can follow them on their pages, study the company website. But a big thing is the mission and core values. We always talked about that in the past. You really want to know the mission and the core values of the company. I can't stress that enough. Because when people are interviewing you, they're going to have, let's say, 5 to 10 people that have the same qualifications as you. As a hiring manager, you are sitting there thinking, will this person get along with the team? Will this person be a team player? These are things that are so important to organizations. Everything is about a team now. Not that it wasn't in the past, but it's really highlighted more now than ever. So you want to make sure that you look at the mission and the core values. You want to believe in those core values also before you interview, and see yourself if you'd be aligned with those. And that is really important to know those things before you go into the company, because you can talk about those and you can actually tailor your questions to the mission of the organization and talk about the values. Say, those were really impressive core values. That's how I feel about joining a firm. And they'll be very impressed with that. All right, we can move on to the next one. Know your interviewers. Well, in the world of social media, I would say everyone in the professional world has a LinkedIn profile. And it's hardly ever that I can't find someone on there. So you always want to ask the recruiter, who am I interviewing with? And usually you'll get a response. They'll either tell you or say, I'll send you an email with those details. Make sure you get that. If you don't, just send a follow-up email to the recruiter. Ask them again if you could have the names of those recruiters, because you want to look them up, and you also want to look at their profile, look at their background. Have they been at the firm 5 years? Have they been at it 10 years? Are you interviewing with a team that all have longevity at this organization? That says a lot about the company. And even if they're not there a long time, those are questions you can really craft when you're interviewing. Why did you come to this company from Fidelity Investments? That's a great company. What made you come to ABC company? And those are things that you'll learn more about on the reasons why they followed that firm and ended up joining that firm. Also view the interview as recommendations on LinkedIn. If you're interviewing with the hiring manager, they have great recommendations on there. That's going to make you feel great that people like to work for that hiring manager, and you want to know the person that you're going, or try to know the person that you're going to be reporting to. You want to gain awareness of their skills. You want to get a little bit more comfortable once they connect with you. You know a little bit about them. You'll be more prepared going into the interview. And if you're connected to, let's say, Karen, and Karen's interviewing you, and we have a like connection, just send a quick email. We're connected to Joanne, and that's just kind of breaks the ice a little bit. So in summary, do your research, know the company, know the role, be prepared, and the more armed you are going into an interview, the more comfortable you'll feel. You'll be feeling more confident, and overcoming the virtual interview if you're not a pro at that yet. Doing the practice, I think everyone with these steps will go into this new world of virtual interviewing, and just knock it out of the park. I'll move on. Here we go. So I put a couple of important questions to ask, because obviously we're still in the COVID pandemic. We obviously don't know when that will end, and we obviously don't know what it's going to look like from an interview standpoint or company hiring coming up now in the near future. So a couple of things have changed within organizations, and these are really important questions that I think are really relevant to our world today. Ask the number of employees that were able to work remotely. Some companies were set up for remote access, some weren't and had to scramble. And you're going to get that response, how they did that. You want to know how they set up their employees for success in such a quick manner, and if they supported them. That's a company you want to work for, right? Were they able to keep all their employees through the COVID pandemic? That is out of, usually a company's hands. If it's a budgeting issue, a lot of companies are struggling now, types of things, but you want to know if they were able to keep those employees. Some will say, sadly, we had to let go, 200 people, but we're so excited to be hiring again. So that you're going to get all different responses there. Ask the precautions that the company took immediately and continue to move forward in the office environment. Some companies are bringing back employees, maybe part-time, maybe full-time. Some people have jobs that you can't do from home, obviously, but that will give you a good indication of what they're doing from a safety precaution moving forward. You want to know that. Did the company continue to show empathy and offer continued employee development? I can't say this enough. During the pandemic, obviously this hit companies quickly. But our lives did not stop. Our jobs did not stop. We just had to do them differently. So did a company support their employees, and did they continue to develop them during this new world of COVID that we're living through right now? To me, that says a lot about an organization. Um, and companies want to say, yes, we did A, B, C, and D. Because if you're joining a company, you want to know how they really worked around this crazy time, how they were successful, and obviously how they supported their employees. That is huge. And I would say this: remember, the way a company treated its workforce during this pandemic is a clear indicator of the work culture of that company. I really feel very strongly about that. And as we know, a lot of people read Glassdoor reviews before you go for an interview. I would say if you see consistency, negative or positive, you could be seeing something there. For example, if you're seeing all positives and you see a couple of negatives, you have to take those sometimes with a grain of salt, meaning maybe someone didn't have a great experience at that company or didn't get along with their manager and just was so mad when they left the company, they went on there and put something negative. But if you see consistent positives, I would say looking at that firm, that it would be a good firm. If you see consistent negative comments page after page, you have to really think, I would say think twice about interview. I always say take the interview, but always have that in the back of your mind. Because you don't ever want to move forward with a company that puts on one culture but truly is another culture in the background, and take an offer with that firm and then learn the hard way, obviously. So Glassdoor reviews, I say they're the majority of them. Like I look at ours all the time. I see, positivity, and then you'll see maybe one or two negatives. And you look at it from their perspective, but you really, really want to look at those before you go on an interview. It's really important. We'll move on to the next slide. Great. So here's a couple more questions I think are really generalized, but I think they're really important questions, especially in our world. Describing the company's culture. Everybody's going to explain it a little different. If they have these core values that they really believe in, they're going to give you examples of that. You want to look at, obviously, what a typical day would look like in the role that you are applying and interviewing for. You also want to see if you can grow in your role. If every single person in front of you, let's say, has been in that role for 20 years and has stayed in the same role, yes, once in a while, people are just so thrilled with their role, love it, they don't want to move up the ladder, and that is just fine. But most of the time, when you're especially early on in your career, you want to know those opportunities. Years ago, if you ask that, people will be like, I can't ask that. They'll think I don't want this job. That's not true. You want to be able to be developed. You want to be able to be coached. You want to be able to have opportunities, maybe 2 years from now, 5 years from now. You want to have them talk about their career growth. Because if every single person in front of you or every single person you've interviewed with has told you they've been there 5 years and they've been in 3 roles, that says a lot that they were able to move around the company. And if it aligns with your career goals, that's fantastic. Also, you want to know about the team dynamic. If you're joining a team, and think of the time that you spend at work, if it's in an office environment, you want to think of that dynamic. You're spending as much time with those people that you work with as you are at home. You want to know if they do team projects together. You want to know if how they work together. Those are things that are really important for the time that you're going to spend within the workplace. You want to be happy. And those are the things you want them aligned with what you're looking for. So those are important questions. Career growth is huge. Do they have mentorship? Mentorship is so hard to come by. People talk about mentorship, but you really want the employer to give you an example of what they think mentorship is. Because I'm going to tell you, if you find a great mentorship in your career, I don't care if you're 5 years in or 20 years in, that is gold. It really is. People are always, in a rush. They're doing their jobs, moving on. But if you find someone you can align with that really is looking out for your best interest and will give you constructive feedback on how you can get better in your role or what avenues to take to get to your next career path in that company, um, make sure you keep that mentorship solid because it is fantastic to have that. I have been fortunate enough in my life to have that. I'm telling you, I look back and I can tell you who that mentor was and what they meant to me and what they meant in my career. So always think of someone you can align with at your new firm or your current firm. Um, Ask them the difficulties that they've experienced in their role and how did they overcome them. Um, they'll talk about maybe how the company supported you. Excuse me, I supported them. And that says a lot about the firm. And it's always a plus to look up the company's mission statement, like I said, or interesting projects they might have on their website. They give back to the community. They do Habitat for Humanity, maybe once a month as a team. Those are things you can bring up in the interview. Say, I'm very passionate about my volunteer work. What does ABC company do for volunteer work? Do they give a day off a year, maybe for volunteer work? How is that supported? And these are things that are really important because people have always said you interview a firm as much as they're interviewing you. And I truly believe that. I know you're going into a role that you really want, and you're like, I want this role. But you have to think about it. I always say if you're walking to your car after an interview and you are excited and you are like thrilled and you did well, that's a great thing. But if you walk into your car and you have questions, then you really have to think about a second interview. That's just my thought. So we'll move on to the next here. So here's some best practices when interviewing. So you want to stay up to date on the employers that you're looking at, one or maybe several target companies. You want to know the job description. Okay, so we look at these job descriptions. You said, I did A, B, C, and D. As we know, a job description is a highlight of the job. Years ago, you used to think, this is my job, A, B, and C. Well, that's no more. A company will highlight what they're looking for, but I can tell you a job description is really just the highlights. It's much bigger than that. So you really want to dig a little deeper about the role itself. So bring value to the organization based on your experience. Talk about examples of some of the highlights they're looking for and tailor it from your experience because they'll be like, oh, wow, she did that or he did this. Things that'll make you stand out. Like I said, start networking online. Cannot emphasize that enough. Practice your virtual interviews. You cannot practice enough. Um, be proactive, follow up. We can talk about that in the post-interview slide. Also, if employees share their contact information with you, you want to send them thank you note. And everybody asks, is it 24 hours? Is it 5 hours? That type of thing. I always say, if you interview during the day, you had to go back to the office, people understand that. So I would say make it a best practice right when you get home from your job, if you're working, to send a thank you note. An electronic thank you notes via email is completely acceptable. Years ago, it used to be handwritten. Now it's all electronic. And if you have, let's say, 3 interviewers, get their email addresses. If they didn't provide you with them, you can get that from the recruiter, every recruiter. And when I was a recruiter, I would get those emails out to the candidates as soon as possible because I know how important that is. Or if they sent it to me, I would forward them right away because that's really important to the hiring manager and it really stands out. I would say do not wait more than 24 hours. I would say the same day, if you interview in the morning, get it out in the evening is perfectly acceptable. So then when they open up their email the next day, they'll be reading that. And find alumni of your school on Handshake that had roles, even if they worked at that company prior to, and that's a good one when I think about it. If Karen, for example, worked at ABC company, but she left to go to TD Ameritrade. At the end of the day, I want to connect with her and say, I noticed that, we both went to URI, we graduated around the same time. I'm interviewing at ABC company, and it looks like you work there. Do you have a couple minutes to chat? I would love the opportunity to learn more about their culture. Um, Now, Karen might have some great things to say about ABC company. She might say, I really don't want to talk about ABC company, that type of thing. But that's a great way of finding a little bit more of the ins and outs of the firm that you are interviewing with. So think about that. They don't have to be currently there. They can be past employees of that organization. We'll move on here. So we went over those emails of the interviewers. Always send a sincere email. I always say personalize it. Um, if there's three of us and we don't share thank you emails, I can tell you that. But at the end of the day, I know when there's a personal email or someone put some thought into that thank you letter, always highlight the value that you can bring to the organization. Don't make it a 2-page thank you note. Just say, I was impressed with this interview. This is why I know that I've done this in the past. I could bring value to your organization. You always want to end an interview on, what are the next steps? And this is something that I see more and more that I'm going to share with you. Companies' processes have slowed down considerably. And I know that because I'm in the HR world, not only maybe with my organization, but many of my friends that are in HR. Everything's about budgeting, as we know, when they hire. But now with COVID, budgets have slowed down a little bit. So if their process is usually 2 to 3 weeks, the recruiter should be completely transparent with you. Ask them if they're going to hear from her or him, who's your recruiter, or you also want to say, is it all right to follow up with you in 2 weeks? Because I would say if you're at the beginning of the process and there's several people involved, there's a lot of scheduling that needs to be done around people's meetings. So when you think about that, if you're the first interviewer and they're interviewing 5 to 6 people, it could be 3 weeks before they can get those people in. And I know when you're job hunting or you really want that job, those 3 weeks seem to be forever. But you really want to set up that opportunity with the recruiter to ask them if they would mind if you would follow up. Because when someone reaches out to me and I'm working on a ton of roles, I'll get right back to them, say, you know what? Let me get an update for you. It might take me a day or two. Then I put something in my Outlook calendar, and then I'll shoot an email over to the hiring manager and say, how are the interviews going? Are you guys almost finished? Where do we stand there? So at least I can give feedback. It might not be specific feedback, but it's something. I always think from a recruiter standpoint, I always put myself in the candidate's shoes. And that's not always, doesn't always happen today because of computers, right? Things are not personalized. You might get a quick email or didn't feel like it was personalized. Really get that relationship going with the recruiter. I got to tell you, it makes such a difference. If I have a good relationship on the phone with a candidate, um, and they reach out to me, I'm going to go that extra mile. I'm going to find out, even if they're not getting that job, I will give constructive feedback if I have it. If we had 3 great candidates and we only have 1 role, and I have to close out the other 2 candidates, I'm going to make sure I call them. But I also want to let them know that they did fantastic and we were really impressed, and that if another role comes up, I will keep them in mind. Um, and make sure you ask a recruiter. This is another thing too. Say, even though I didn't get this role, and thank you so much for calling me and letting me know. Is there anything you can share with me that I could do better next time? Or, would the company be interested in interviewing me for other roles coming up in the near future? So you always want to keep in touch with that recruiter. So I think that's really key, because the way to a hiring manager is through the recruiter. So always remember that. And be proactive. If some time has elapsed and you haven't heard from the recruiter, it is just fine to reach out to the recruiter. I mean, I have people reach out to me from their cars after the interview. And unfortunately, I try to set realistic expectations. I work for the government and it's a slow process and it's frustrating for people sometimes because I understand where they're coming from, especially if you're job hunting or have been affected, your job has been affected by COVID. I know it's a very stressful time, but the process has every company has their process and sometimes some are a lot slower than others, but just try to be, open, be a little bit more patient in this day and age and just be proactive and keep, letting the recruiter know that you're interested in moving forward. Those are some of the best practices I can share. And I think we're time for Q&A. So we can open it up to the floor.
All right, can you hear me, Michelle?
I can. Thank you, Karen.
I actually have questions that came through, not through chat, but Q&A. I
Okay.
would ask folks to try to get questions into chat, but let me go with these three.
Absolutely.
So, should I connect with people that I've interviewed with on LinkedIn?
Yes, I don't see anything wrong with that. If it's a current interview, absolutely. I would say prior to the interview, if I received, for example, I'll give you an example about me when I was thinking about coming to this current role. I had a panel interview of 5 people, and I looked them all up on LinkedIn and I sent them a connection. I looked at their profiles, just what I'm telling you. So I knew a little bit about their background. So I felt like when they went in there and we were having conversations, that if, they talked about maybe, another company, I kind of knew about that they were there at that company for 10 years and they recently came to the role. Like my current manager came from the corporate world also into government 6 years ago. So I knew she wasn't there for 30 years. Like a lot of people never leave government, right? So I felt like we had a little thing in common because, it was great to ask her, like, what was the transition like coming from corporate America to government? Because it's two major different industries, right? What was what were the struggles, like what were the challenges? And she appreciated those conversations because she talked about them and it was really helpful for me when I was making that decision to leave an industry I'd been with for almost 10 years. So most definitely connect.
Terrific. And then, in your opinion, is it okay to ask if remote work will be acceptable after we start returning to the office?
Well, I think during the interview, that's definitely a great question. Completely acceptable, especially in this day and age, right? But things that I think are really important are, first of all, has the company started thinking about bringing people back? What is that going to look like in the future? They might say, well, you know what, we realize that people can work from home and be just as productive, and we're going to give people the flexibility. Think about it. A lot of the workforce now have people with young children that are at home learning. So companies had to, even if they weren't flexible before, if they want to retain the best talent, they had to be flexible. So that's a great question, and completely acceptable this day and age. Absolutely, I would want to know it.
Good. And we have a question in the chat box. Do you have any tips or advice to prepare for a second interview?
Absolutely, absolutely. So your first interview, you're nervous. Who is not? I mean, I don't think I know anybody that doesn't get a little nervous because I think it's the anticipation of what they're going to ask me, right? Um, so you always say if you made it to a second interview, you did something right in the first interview, right? Because you whittle down, your talent pool and get, the standouts, right? So you feel a little bit more comfortable with the culture. The second interview, I would really highly recommend you really look at the job description. Now, I am a big fan of behavioral based interviews, and a lot of companies are. We currently use them. I've used them in my last 2 firms. And what they're getting from a behavioral based interview is this is a situation that happened. How did you work through it? And what was the end result? And sometimes they'll throw in, what would you do differently? So that's one question. So you're thinking of a whole scenario, right? So think about those questions when you go in, because I can guarantee you will be asked some form of behavioral based questions. So in the second interview, sometimes it's a little harder. I can't say it always is. You might meet with a completely different team, completely different personality vibe when you're walking in, but they're really digging deep on your skill set and your fit of the culture. Those are the two main things you're looking for in a second interview. Will, they be able to do this job? They gave me great examples of skill sets that are transferable. They were articulate. They gave me team, success working with teams. Those are the things that are so important. But the two main things I look for in a second interview are you articulated that you can do this job and you gave me the reasons why, but also too, you gave me examples of working with a team and being successful. And those are the things they're really looking for on a second round. And don't be surprised if they have third and fourth rounds. I hear that all the time. Because of everybody's schedule, and sometimes it's not always easy, but I gotta tell you, with the world of virtual interviews, it is much easier now. People will take an interview at 7 o'clock at night. If you are on the higher view platform, which a lot of companies use, they will send you a link that's good for 48 hours. Every company can tailor that time frame. But for example, 17, let's say they give you 24 hours, right? So you're like, okay, I'll do that tonight. Put the kids to bed and I'll put my professional clothes on. Doesn't matter if you take it at midnight because it's recorded. And then the next day I come in with an email saying, Karen finished her interview, is completed. So I can, put my AirPods on and listen to it for, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And then we can forward it to the hiring manager for review. So like I said, when I say about practice and platforms, most companies are using HireVue, Zoom, Microsoft Teams is a big one. I have my favorites, of course, but there are some other platforms that I've never heard of. I'm working with colleges now doing career fairs, and I just learned 6 new platforms. I had no idea. I knew one, but one is usually like the next one. You just have to navigate, and through much practice and taking tutorials and going on YouTube, when they came into the rooms, at first I was a little uncomfortable. Within 5 minutes, you're kind of navigating and then you feel a little bit more comfortable. So second interviews, like I said, they're definitely looking deeper into your skill set. Okay, is another one. Is there a lot of information given? I'm sorry, I'm having problems seeing that.
Yes, I'll read it. Is it
All right.
acceptable to ask for clarification on something the interviewer explained if a lot of information was given and if I have questions after first interview?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I would highly recommend, if you didn't have clarification at the interview, if you still have the opportunity in the interview at the end of it, say, there's something we spoke about early in the interview, and I just wanted to see if you could explain that a little bit deeper of what you're looking for. It's fine to ask in that interview than to go back, because think about it, when you go back, you're asking through a recruiter. So I would highly recommend, you think about it then, sometimes you're walking in your car and going, I should have asked that. But if you could wait till the end of the interview through all the interviewers, if it's more than one, say, could you clarify that a little bit more on the question? And they're fine with that. People ask me that all the time. I interviewed a couple people today, and we had some technical issues on both sides, and we couldn't hear each other, and that's fine. People, they're not, I mean, we're human beings, right? So I might have a standard question and they're, processing it different, and that's fine. That's fine.
Yep.
Totally acceptable.
And one came through Q&A. Do recruiters see if I have multiple applications, and does it look bad if I'm applying to more than one job at an organization?
Good question. We have our serial application people, like 400 and 500, and I can see that. Um, if it's excessive, especially in a small period of time, I kind of take it with a grain. If it's 400, no, yes, it does look bad. But if it's 5 or 10, no. If it's in the same, if you are applying for things that you're not qualified for, yes, it does look bad. And I know some people do that, right? They're like, well, I could do that job. I could do that job. I say, be really mindful of what you're applying for. Make sure you're qualified for it. You can apply for a stretch job. I'm all for that. But if it's like, I'm not an IT person, like I could to never even answer the phone in IT. And if you looked at my resume and I applied for, an IT engineer, they'd be like, well, what is she doing? Why is she applying to this role? So I would say, and I can't give you a number because if over a year period of time, someone, applied to 10 jobs, that's fine. But just be mindful that you really want to apply to the roles that you're qualified for. I'll leave it as that. But yes, recruiters can see all the applications that you have from the systems.
Yeah. And we have another question in chat. Do you have any tips for an introverted and very anxious interviewee?
Absolutely. First of all, maybe this is the way I feel, but I know how it feels to be on the other side, right? And I think every interviewer that I've interviewed with, when I've done panel interviews or even one-on-ones, I try to make people feel comfortable because I know they're anxious. Um, and maybe it's my delivery, and there are some interviewers that are really tough. Don't get me wrong, different personalities, that type of thing. But I would say, and I can't emphasize this enough, if you are, the more prepared you are, the more comfortable you will be. Once you connect on WebEx here, so you've got that behind you, right? So I'm talking face to face with Karen right now. Once I have that technology piece mastered, the new worlds of virtual reality, then I'm going to talk to you like a person and have that conversation. I like to have a conversation in my interviews. That's my style, but not everyone has that style. I would say, breathe, you know, take an hour or two before an interview if you have that opportunity to do that. Um, Try not to cut it close if you're leaving your job to go for an interview. I know that's not always easy to do, but think about maybe taking a half hour before just to relax in your car, maybe go over your questions, your notes. But I think the biggest thing takeaway is being prepared because you'll be so much more confident going into that interview. If you feel like there's nothing more about that company you could know other than being an employee, that's fantastic. You know about their core values, you know about the mission statement, you know who the CEO is. That's important too. Um, and what they're striving for the company. The more information you know, looking at the job description, having those questions that you know they can ask you any question. You can always take a breather after a question. Everybody uses this. That's a great question. I always say that only gives you 3 seconds, right? So when you say that, but those 3 seconds make a difference because you can gather a thought, and all you need is like that little thought to come to your mind, and then you can react and explain, your skill set for that particular question. But I would say, being prepared as much as you can be will make all the difference in the world.
Great. So I don't see any other questions in chat, and there is one more question in Q&A. So perhaps we could make this our last question. We are
Okay,
hitting the top of the hour, and I
that's
appreciate
fine.
everyone for
That's
staying on
fine.
and Michelle for staying on.
Absolutely.
So the last question that came up in Q&A, I take notes and I also bring a lot of notes to the interview. Now that we're in a virtual world, I'm looking down a lot and I'm afraid that's not appreciated.
Okay, so there's some great things here, and I'll share this with you. I knew this PowerPoint like the back of my hand, so Karen was nice enough to put it up for me, which is always great to, have a focal point. But I always knew like I had this in front of me, right? So I want to talk to the camera. I want to talk to that person. I want that eye contact when you're interviewing. So, for example, I'll give you a couple tips. I'm lucky enough to have a stand-up desk here, and it has like 2 levels, but you could do this with books at home. Okay, so you want to position your computer as high as eye level. Put 10 books, who cares, right? So we're side to side. So you have underneath here for your notes. So you can position your notes like this. So I have it standing up, but you can't even see it, can you?
Correct.
So I could read right from here and look at you, look down and then look at you, and you'd never know. So I played around with the computer, believe me, doing presentations, but I think the greatest thing is that I think the world is pretty cool because you can have your notes that you've worked so hard on in front of you, make them huge, make them highlighted, right all over them, and have them plastered all around your desk, and you can't even see me. So I think that's a great tip, right? So,
Yeah, that is a great tip. And don't hesitate to say to your interviewer, I might take a note or two. So you can
absolutely,
be that honest too.
absolutely. And questions until this, virtual world came into existence, everyone had a notebook when they went into an interview, right? They want to be prepared and they want to open it up and they want to have those questions prepared for the end of the interview. And that is completely fine because there is no one I don't know anybody that can ad lib a complete, 45-minute interview without having notes. So that's completely acceptable. And one thing I want to add is I want everybody, if you're not already on LinkedIn or we're not connected, feel free to send me a LinkedIn connection. And then we'll be able to have any type of dialogue you want. Feel free to send me a message. If you're going for an interview, you want to chat about it, you want me to look at your resume. I know the URI has an amazing career center and they could do it probably 10 times better than I could. But if you want a second set of eyes, I'm more than happy to have anybody. Um, so I always want everybody to go out and nail that interview. I want you to interview. Let me know, Michelle, I got the job. So, but I'm always here to help. Anybody that's anxious, we can work through things, do a mock interview. So whatever you need, I'm always just a click away on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That's a great gift to everyone on this call. And for folks that will be reviewing it, we have so many hits of people that are going in and looking at these recordings.
Great.
So to everyone, thank you so much. It is the top of the hour. We didn't know if we would stay a full hour, but boy, we certainly did.
Great.
Michelle, thank you for your time. You gave
Welcome.
terrific insights.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. It was such a pleasure, Karen, and we'll be in touch. Thank you,
All
everyone,
right.
for joining this evening. I
Good
appreciate
night,
it.
everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good
Bye-bye.
night. Bye-bye.